Hello, folks. Your favorite tech podcast is back. I am Leslie DeMonte, your host for Mint Techcetra, this podcast where we're going to talk about how AI thinks faster than your Monday brain and everything tech that surrounds your life. So, to keep you updated in today's episode, I have my old colleague back, Shouvik Das. Uh, Shouvik, say hello to your friends.
Hello, everyone. Happy to be back with the new season of Mint
Absolutely.
Techcetra.
And then this season, I think we have got a lot to talk about. I mean, we had a brief gap because we were sort of, collecting our thoughts and wondering what news should we bring? Should we change the format? But we realized that, if something is not, as they say that lovely saying, if it ain't broken, don't fix it. So probably we are going to go around with that.
Absolutely.
And yeah, lovely things to talk about. I mean, a lot, in fact, both in the field of AI, both in the field of tech. I mean, the developments, the pace at which tech is accelerating, the pace at which AI is accelerating is astounding. I mean, it's overwhelming. It's practically impossible. And I pity Shouvik who has to follow this on a daily basis. I got out of the daily grind, so I'm a little lucky out here. But Shouvik, I can see, I can sort of sense your angst. I can only empathize with it at this point in time.
Well, there is every day, Leslie. We have a small group of reporters here in Delhi who largely look at tech policy, AI, and so on. And we have this internal sort of joke that every day at around 6:30 is like the time 6:30 in the evening when you're sort of done with the day, you've met your people, you've written your story, you're ready to sort of let your hair down, go home. That's when something really important will break. For instance, the
Yeah,
Cloudflare outage the
absolutely.
other day. And that happened because somebody was trying to ask ChatGPT to write a headline for them. And they kept saying, yeah, ChatGPT is not working. ChatGPT is not working. There's something wrong. And we kept saying, nah, that's not possible. I mean, and then suddenly someone was like, oh, guys, there's a massive outage. And then it blew up into something and people got pulled back to work. So there's someday there's a policy which comes in, someday there is an outage that happens, someday there's a massive data breach that happens, someday there's a big platform that's launched. Yeah, it's a lot. And as we keep joking that technology has probably become the most important sector for everyone to follow. And it's not just the most important, it's also the most
No, I'm
happening.
so glad you mentioned
And
about,
I'm sure
you
you also
mentioned
feel.
about the Cloudflare outage that that brought almost, half of the internet. In fact, actually, because we identify a lot with, you can't use, earlier we used to say that if I can't use Google, you take away Google search and, everything used to come to a halt. And now it is like ChatGPT or any of these LLM based chatbots. So the interesting part is that the
Right.
Cloudflare outage cost an average CFD broker nearly $1.6 billion dollars in trading volumes. Now, I was, actually, I'm not very familiar with what a CFD thing, but I realized that it's contract for differences, which allows traders to profit from price movements without owning the
Right.
asset. Now, that I found pretty interesting. I said, wow, $1.6 billion dollars in trading losses. I don't know whether to sympathize with them or
Right.
just, think because I'm not much of a believer in CFD. But yeah, I mean, just to understand the kind of impact that we had. And of course, every conceivable, internet service provider was down at that point in time. And it was a major thing. You were covering it on
Right.
I would say, ball to ball basis. So can you just tell our viewers and listeners what happened, just briefly?
So we were just sort of overseeing, and one of the interesting things is like, just about a few months earlier, another Cloudflare outage. We know the kind of damage it caused. Airports went down, hospitals went down. Of course, a glitch in the overall CDN and cloud system. For those of you who are seeing us over here, CDN is sort of like the way, the mechanism through which content gets shared instantly across the world. So if you're sharing a link from an article somewhere in the United States and your friend is based in Thailand, it takes like maybe half a second or something. So CDNs are what make it possible. So the entire global content network system came to a halt. and this happened because of a glitch in the software. And it's not something that doesn't happen. Cloud outages are pretty, I wouldn't say common, but when they do happen, they do affect a lot of platforms because these services are unique, these services are massive, these services are used by most companies around the world. And as a result, this is what ends up happening.
It's also
So,
important because the today you find most of the or practically all the AI workloads, whether it's inferencing or whatever it be, they're all on the
right.
cloud. So moment you have any of these guys, go belly under, as I would say, you're going to have a serious problem because everything gets impacted. And viewers and listeners, Um, the CDN that he was talking about, the name itself is a content delivery network. So they use codecs, basically compression, decompression kind of techniques, and that's exactly what allows all
Right.
this heavy kind of data that we use. Imagine the amount of YouTube users that we have, the video users, the amount of AI generated
Absolutely.
images, AI generated code, heavy files are being transferred on a daily basis. They have to be compressed and decompressed at the other end for us to make sense of it, and it's all happening in real time. So it's amazing. I mean, we it's like a fast food service. If Blinkit or your Zomato does not come in that designated time, we get very upset. And this is exactly what happens on the internet also.
And in fact, Leslie, now that you mentioned this, there was this metric sometime shared last year that the amount of good morning messages that are shared on WhatsApp, each of those image files would be, for us, it's nothing. It's just we click a button and we forward a message from one group to another group, and there are 50 people sharing their own versions of these messages. It's a massive amount of content. And for the consumer, of course, when a system breaks, I think the biggest thing that happens is when a system breaks, we are so reliant on WhatsApp, we are so reliant on Twitter, we are so reliant on, in fact, so many people rely on Twitter for live traffic information. In Bombay, in Delhi, there are these handles which keep posting live traffic information on Twitter. And I was recently told by somebody in our office in the newsroom the other day that um, this is just ridiculous. How can this happen? Twitter should have a backup. And that also
They all
kind
have
of
backups.
becomes an
So
important,
that's a little unfair because everybody
absolutely.
has a disaster recovery mechanism. But as we showed, remember when we covered Cloudflare last time also, we mentioned that sometimes these disaster recovery things are separated. They're in silos sometimes. So the cascading
Yes,
effect, and
yes,
it is a complex network. So sometimes there are those pockets that of intensity that collapse.
right. And it's also very expensive, I would say, to kind of have two or three CDNs working
You don't
together.
have a disaster
And it's
recovery
also
for
very
everything because you
complex.
have it's a cost to benefit ratio. At the end of the day, you wonder, okay, how crucial is your data? So if it's real time data related to
Right,
trading, then of course you do not want it to collapse because that could result in
right,
losses. So obviously the disaster recovery
right,
mechanism on a trading or a broking website, etc., they will be far more robust than what is say on a kind of a content simple content site where the content can be cached also. There's a lot of caching techniques. If you're not really updating it in real time, there's no reason for it to. E-commerce sites like Amazon, if they crash, yes, because you're doing a delivery or you're doing a transaction, or then you have a serious problem. Banking transactions, financial transactions,
absolutely.
any for that matter.
And I think for all of this, we are reliant on online transactions, and we are sort of reliant on online platforms, UPI payments, card payments, and so on and so forth. Um, it does affect people on a daily basis, and there are no two ways
Absolutely,
about it.
absolutely. Our whole world is become so digital that it scares me. What happens? We have had these conversations. What happens if there's a solar storm? But of course, I mean, it's like talking about GI at this point in
Right,
time. So let's not scare our
right,
friends out here. But yes, I mean, if we were to go off the grid tomorrow for whatever reason, whether it's a forced kind of, force majeure, as they say, act of God or something like that, uh, we are in serious trouble, I can tell you, because our lives are so digitally entwined. We just don't know how to live off the grid. And at least my generation, I would say, with I'm not saying it with a sense of pride or something, but I would say with a sense of slight comfort that we do know how to live off the grid. I'm not sure whether the
In
Gen Z
fact,
and millennials really know how to do that, but maybe we need to train ourselves sometimes.
Leslie, now that you mentioned this, I read something very interesting recently from one of our colleagues on the Mint news desk, James Matthew, who wrote a lovely little LinkedIn post about how there's been a sort of conflict in agreeing on certain commercial terms between telecom operators and the Mumbai Metro Rail Corporation, which has led to a certain stretch of the Mumbai Metro's Aqua line being completely blacked out in terms of
Oh,
network access. So if you get on the metro for a certain stretch, you have no internet.
that should be
And
sold as paradise.
he
That
made a
should be a
very
tourist attraction.
he made this very astute observation that for a while people don't know what to do, so they start talking to each other, which is that old school commute thing. We've all heard of the famous Mumbai local stories. In fact, people who've not stayed in the city also have heard about these. How people have become friends, they've become family friends. You end up sharing and discovering so much more. People started reading magazines and
Absolutely.
newspapers for during their commute. And
Yeah,
I
yeah.
found it very
Shouvik,
interesting
you
that,
know that
of
I live
course,
in
the
Goa.
dispute,
You know that. Yeah, I moved place
right,
to Goa. So because I wanted peace of mind, and I actually
right,
realized that I made more friends. I actually get time to talk to people because they're not on their,
yes,
yeah, they're not taking into their mobiles and just constantly scrolling. I can actually talk to a shopkeeper and discuss certain things. He knows now a little about my family. I actually know what my shopkeeper's family does. And this used to happen when we were kids. Now it is surprisingly,
right,
I find that there are pockets in the world where we can actually do that, and it's a lovely. In fact, actually, that
yes.
aqua. Duct or whatever you want, that metro, underground metro, that particular area should be designated as a tourist attraction. So
There were people who in fact commented on James's post saying that can we turn this into like a 500
yes,
rupees an hour digital
the
detox
people will pay for
experience
it. People will pay for
where
it.
any kind of these Cloudflare outage is not going to bother you. You're going to be talking to friends, reading a newspaper, debating about some new happening that happened. I found it
No,
an
no,
excellent
James and
idea.
because I've had the good fortune of James and I used to sit together and we used to discuss all these. I mean, yes, you can call it two old
Right.
fogies, getting back and discussing nostalgic things. But at the same time, yeah, it was amazing, and I'm so glad that James brought up that point. But talking about digital detox and etc. And another scary part is, of course, the data leakages that are happening time and again. And now we have,
Yes.
you could tell our friends a little about the WhatsApp massive flaw that put phone numbers of 3.5 billion users at risk. Now, this is the paper being put up by some Australian researchers on GitHub. So that got a lot of it's hit the headlines. And of course, now that we're using WhatsApp, another thing for every conceivable transaction. I mean, I get all my documents on WhatsApp. Conversations are happening on WhatsApp. I
Right.
know that they say it's encrypted, etc., and we are, sort of some comfort level. But every time you find these data leaks coming out, if somebody, we also have started sharing a lot of financial data on that. Sometimes you're talking to a bank.
Absolutely, Leslie. And I think I was just briefly reading up on it yesterday when the news sort of broke. And to my understanding, a large part of the reason why the WhatsApp data breach kind of blew up the way it did, I think 3.5 billion total records around the world, including 750 million from India, which is like half of half of India's population, and so many people's phone numbers and personally identifiable information. Uh, surfacing online is also largely because of the way WhatsApp works, where WhatsApp has a public link where you can easily kind of track a person's phone number, even if you're sort of hot guessing it, for that matter. And that is something that caused a privacy concern, a data breach of sorts, where people could identify who you are if you don't have certain safety filters on. For instance, filters that can restrict who can see your name, who can see your photograph, who can see your personal status updates, which are all privacy filters on WhatsApp, and something that we don't really think about much a lot of times. And that is something that contributed to malicious threat actors tapping into this feature and getting a massive amount of personal information. And it's also being touted as one of the largest sort of personal data breach collections, so to speak, so far worldwide. Uh, so yeah, it's
Yeah,
pretty
because data
scary.
is money in today's time. Everybody wants to scrape your data. As I said, we have been talking about this, ad nauseum, that there's nothing called a free lunch, especially online. Because
Absolutely,
I think,
absolutely.
this has been going on for quite some time. We are saying, no, we want everything free. No, I have a very big problem with that, because you are the product. You become the product at the end of the day. We don't realize that we are actually on sale. So everybody wants to, because we are very, very, imagine the amount of information that everybody has about us.
I think there have been sort of counter arguments on the privacy front that it's a fair trade-off in a way, that if you don't want to pay for a service but get the best of services, then be ready to pay for it with your data. And if you don't want to pay with your data, then you kind of pay a subscription fee or
Shouvik,
pay a monthly
I'd like to interject
service
at this
fee.
point in time, because it's a very valid point. I have no problem with that kind of argument. My only is it
Right,
informed consent?
right,
That's my question. Because the dangerous part is, see, you and I know the rules, okay, which brings us back to the AI DPDP
right.
rules that have been notified, which I know that is something that I would
Yes,
love you to brief our viewers and listeners on. But before we come to that, this is
absolutely.
tying in with exactly the DPDP rules. Now, what happens is, the
Right,
crux of the matter is, most of the people who use it are not aware of these nuances or the complexities. So, really
absolutely.
speaking, is it a question of informed consent, or is it like, okay, fine, like everything else? Like, okay, let me give you another kind of analogy. In law, okay, there's a lovely saying, ignorantia juris non excusat. It simply means that ignorance of law is not an excuse. Okay. Now,
Right.
that's a nice statement, a simple statement, a very thing. And they'll tell you, if somebody sort of arrests you for under some specific law, they'll tell you, ignorantia juris non excusat. Oh, lovely. But the point is, how many people
Right.
actually know the law?
And in fact, Leslie, this is very true because one of the points, of course, the Digital Personal Data Protection Act is now notified. It's enforced on ground. The rules are in place. Um, but I remember during the consultation process, which we've extensively reported on over the years, one of the points that was raised was that tech platforms make it so difficult for people to try and understand what data is being collected and what they're saying, because not everyone is equally tech savvy. A lot of people find these clauses intimidating. And I remember in the early days, we used to get the EULA contracts, or end user license agreement contracts, and we used to just press enter and accept it because we knew that it's just a
It's just
process.
a
But
process.
then
You have something like
it's
50
sort of like an
pages.
indemnity
Now,
form.
who's going to go to 80 and 100 pages on
Right,
the policy
absolutely,
front, like terms of use, these are like these banking for, terms of use or fixed deposit.
absolutely, absolutely. And they would all be written in like very legalese language. And so one of the points that's been mentioned in the Digital Personal Data Protection Act is that you have to make sure that you present the law and the consent mechanism in as simple a language as possible, so that even a person who's using a banking app or a communications app for the very first time Someone who's using a social media app for the very first time, he's 80 years old, not very tech savvy, comes on the platform to connect with their children who live on the other side of the world. You can't leverage their lack of understanding to kind of say that, oh, but look, we presented this 95-page contract from to him and he said okay. So you have to give it in like a crisp, simple language, few basic lines. We would like to collect your data. Is it okay or not okay? Something as simple as that is what has been prescribed. But the DPDP rules, the privacy rules, Leslie, I'd like to bring
Yeah,
our listeners and viewers'
give me three
attention
or
to
five
that for a
highlights.
second. So one of the key things is that children's data or data belonging to people under the age of 18, they cannot be accessed by platforms unless specifically in the case of safety reasons. So the government eventually did make an exemption to this. Initially, they had proposed a blanket ban on accessing data of anyone under the age of 18. Now they've said you can access when it comes to safety features, such as parents using a certain app to keep a track of where their kids are. Of course, kids
No, but
nowadays have
how,
phones and they go
how
for
do you prove that
tuitions
you're
and
under
so on.
18? Or how do you prove that you're not under 18?
So there is, of course, that clause of verifiable parental consent
I'm
which
saying
is
that
being
can be
imposed on social
manipulated.
media platforms. Right, absolutely. So at the end of the day, it will depend on if a child is willful
Exactly.
enough, they can also
It's
circumvent
it's
that
being done in good
limitation.
faith.
But right, absolutely. But I have, for instance, seen the activity of GDPR work out in Europe, where I've known people personally call up a Facebook help center and take them to account on that. My child opened a Facebook account without my consent. How could you let this happen? And platforms have had to take action. They've had to kind of suspend their account and or seek express consent from the parent. So that's something that we're looking at now. The DPDP rules have also kind of given an 18-month window for all platforms to comply. Now, henceforth, if any platform wants to track you and use your data after this 18-month period, they will have to come to you and seek consent from you in clear, simple language and not like we were just discussing a 95-page legal contract and say that we would like to use your data for advertising, give us consent or not. um, of course, now platforms would kind of try and use it around in various ways. If you do not give consent of data, you might not get all the features and services and so on. Because at the end of the day, uh, performance marketing and targeted advertising is the core revenue stream. The DPDP Act also, one last thing I would like to say is that it also kind of puts the onus on the platforms to make sure that they make it easy for people to understand what their data is being used for. And I think that's one key part which it has gotten right. Couple of concerns that have been raised by civil society is that, of course, exemptions to government bodies, where the government can ask for any kind of data to be stored extensively for a period of 1 year or more, citing the interest of national security. And there are no specified procedure where it mandates that the government has to notify the cause of national security before seeking that data. So civil society has raised concerns around that and said that this is somewhat of an example of government overreach and is not something that's ideal for a progressive democracy. But of course, these are debates which will keep continuing. But for now, this is the format of the law. If you are on social media platforms, they'll come to you seeking consent to use your data. If you're an underage user, you have to get verifiable parental consent. Not just tick a form, but also verify that your parent has consented to it. There could be an identity-based mechanism to do it.
No, I think these are steps in the right direction. I mean, see, it's impossible to please everybody, and you'll always have, differences of opinion as when there are thinking individuals concerned. So there'll always be a counter opinion, and we are okay
Absolutely.
with that because, but somebody has to, lay down the rules, and somebody has to, after I think that so I think the process is clearly defined that you have a draft consultation out, you have presented a thing, whether it is whether your opinion has been taken into consideration or not, that's a moot area. It's a gray area. We will not get into that. But at the end of the day, when the rules have been notified, you have to follow them. Period. That's how the law of the land
Absolutely.
works. We
Absolutely.
have to learn to
Absolutely.
respect that. Otherwise, it
Absolutely.
becomes a kind of a rebellion, which is a very different area of discussion. But
Of course.
I think the interesting part is, along with the DPDP rules, which have been notified now, which have become law, the interesting part is the AI governance guidelines. Now, you and I both have been speaking about, we sort of had hinted also earlier that the Digital India Act would be on the back burner for quite some time, because the government has adopted a
Yes.
techno-legal framework. Uh, Obviously, because this
Yes.
whole question of balancing innovation, where it doesn't want to kill innovation or stifle innovation,
Right.
by having, burdening the innovation under too many laws. So you do not want too much of a bureaucracy out here, and that can get pretty unnerving and stifling, as they say. So the interesting part is the AI governance guidelines as such seem to be pretty interesting. I think, if what are the couple of things that have sort of caught your attention? That would be interesting.
The AI governance framework is a set of recommendations, and which again, it means that it's not binding, it's not a law, but it's a sort of way forward that has been um sort of signaled by the government that this is the approach that we want to take when it comes to regulating AI. And the key part to note from the governance framework is that the government is saying that they do not want to frame an AI law. And we may not necessarily require a dedicated law for AI, because a lot of things which are concerns raised on AI, be it copyright infringement issues, we have
Already
the
being
Copyright
addressed by
Act for
current
that.
laws.
Absolutely, and people have said that AI is impersonating my appearance. There are personal infringement laws, and the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita is something. The PNS kind of has these penal clauses, criminal clauses, which are already in place. So the government doesn't want to bring forward a law. They will only look at AI from a risk and harms based approach. um, and that, I think, the framework is great for startups and corporates who are building AI products. And that's the real intention, which is to signal to the world, to the big tech companies, and to the startups, to VC investors, that we're taking a light touched AI regulation approach, and we will look at letting you innovate without burdening you with like six different laws in terms of, you get to innovate within a narrow framework. And I think that's the main takeaway from the AI governance framework. Once again, as the IT ministry clarifies, it's not binding, it's not a law, it's a framework, it's a set of recommendations by an expert committee. And it gives us a look into what we can expect from AI in our country, which is, of course, again in line with the AI tagging rules, the draft AI tagging rules, which came just before the framework, which of course, had prescribed that tech companies, including folks like OpenAI, folks like Meta, um, should mandatorily tag and watermark every single piece of content that is algorithmically modified. And that has created a lot of furor, because technically, even this video, if I apply a filter, it is algorithmically modified. So people have written to the ministry, and of course, a massive amount of public consultation has happened. That your idea at the end of the day is to regulate deepfakes and to cut down impersonation and disinformation, not just misinformation, but deliberate misinformation on the internet. And that doesn't need you to penalize people who are, applying a filter on their selfie. That's like
No,
harmless.
by that
Or if
logic,
you
everybody who
use
applies makeup should be arrested.
Absolutely, and that is the point which the creative community raised, that if I use OpenAI Sora and I use a lot of creative prompts and create a movie using OpenAI Sora, you can't come and penalize me saying that, oh, this is
No,
AI
so that's why I
generated
said
content, because
there's
it's
a
good
massive
content.
difference. I was just having an AI workshop for some people, and I was explaining. I said there's a very big difference between AI generated content and AI assisted content. We have to learn to differentiate
Right.
between the two.
Absolutely.
Because historically also we have been
Right.
using tech tools to enhance whatever we have been doing. So there's nothing
Right.
great in that. And let's remind our viewers and listeners also that the European Union, which is known for very stringent AI laws, is also now diluting the laws. There are talks
Right.
of diluting the laws because they do not want to stifle innovation. Again, it's the whole thing of whether you're throwing the baby with the bathwater.
Absolutely. In fact, the EU AI Act, Leslie, Clause 50 of the EU AI Act is what deals with deep fakes and disinformation. And I think a large part of where India kind of took its deep fake tagging rules from is from Clause 50 of the EU AI Act. And they kind of clearly, very specifically target deliberate misinformation or people who are using AI to take a piece of information and morph it into something that it is not. And I think that's the approach that folks like NASCOM and IAMAI have kind of recommended in their submissions. We read through the copies of the submissions, and they kind of recommend that, India right now is being seen as a geography which is probably one of the world's largest business opportunities in the next 5 to 10 years. And we shouldn't stifle companies who are looking to do business here from a legal standpoint. And the good part is that the center is cognizant of that, and which is why the governance framework comes in as an appreciated framework. Most people have said that it's a sensible signal from the government that they don't want to take a heavy-handed approach to regulation. Of course, we have the DPDP Act in place, and that's what they've said. If you talk about personal data being used by AI platforms, we have your DPDP. You talk about you being represented as something else, we have your impersonation laws, you have your criminal laws, you have your civil laws. We don't need more laws, at
Absolutely.
least for AI. And for what it's worth, I think it's a good policy standpoint to take.
Reminds me of that famous, the dialogue of Sunil, right? Why am I Sunil Deol? Basically, तारीख पे तारीख. So you have this
Yes.
law pe law,
I think,
कानून पे कानून, if you have to have that kind of a dialogue. So you don't want that kind of stuff. You don't
yes,
want to, burden people with too many laws. And I think it's a very sensible kind of approach. At the end
right.
of the day, the government does have the
Absolutely.
option if things, as they say, it's a carrot and stick approach. If the carrot doesn't work, then the stick will follow.
Of course.
But friends, we've had a lovely discussion. We started with Cloudflare outages. We spoke about the kind of problems that we face with CDNs and the the kind of opportunities that CDNs also offer. Because to be fair, these are very complex scenarios, and we are like sort of so our lives are so digitally intertwined that we really find it difficult sometimes to extricate ourselves from those situations, and we get extremely unnerved and antsy when the internet is down even for a minute. But we should also reflect, and it's time for introspection on that particular thing. Of course, data leakages on WhatsApp, that's another big issue, which lead directly into the DPDP rules and now the AI governance guidelines, which we have spoken to at length. And we'll have many such discussions as we go on in our weekly Mint Techcetra podcast, as they say. And
Mint
so,
Techcetra
Shouvik, happy to have
podcast.
you back, and I'm also happy to be back.
Yes, happy to
And
be here, Leslie.
friends,
Yes.
Shavik will be on most of the episodes, unless, of course, he's got some pressing problems where probably some ministers are calling him for some interview or whatever it be. But other than that, I think I'm sure we both will be able to make time for this thing, because we want to, engage with you. And if you have any questions, we would love to answer them on this podcast. If you have any suggestions on how we can improve this podcast, we are very open to it. In fact, actually, we would just want all together just have a fun time, and we want to, sort of disseminate information from our end and learn from you. So, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It was a fun episode, Leslie. Good to speak about a bunch of work that we're doing, and would be good to hear from people as well, and to have a good debate. But yes, thank you, everyone. Thank you.